Welcome, everybody, again. I'm Eileen Flicker, the Early Childhood Education Specialist at USCJ. It is truly an honor to introduce you all to Dr. Emily Aronoff Tech. Dr. Tech is a Jewish educator, music educator, and teacher educator. She's the founder of JewishLearningMatters.com, which is a great resource I strongly encourage you all to check out. Dr. Tech's research for her dissertation at Graf College was on how Hot Shabbat celebrations include the whole family in Jewish life. I am very pleased and honored to hand the microphone over to Dr. Emily Aronoff Tech.
Thanks, Eileen, and thanks everyone for bearing with us as we had a slight technical glitch. I'm going to tell you all about my research, and I'm excited because I have spent literally days and weeks and months talking about this very specific thing, and I'm glad that so many people are interested. So you know, my plan is that I'm going to tell you about my project for about 15 minutes and then tell you and just sort of highlight some of the implications that I think are going to be most pertinent to people who signed up for this USCJ webinar. And then I'm going to pause and I'm going to unclick from my presentation so I can look in the chat window and see if anybody has any sort of specific concerns or questions or feedback, so I can make sure to sort of tailor that. I fully intend on running out of time because I have so much to share with you. I also have the tendency to speak really quickly. So please know that I will give my slides. They will be freely available. This recording that we just worked so hard to make sure happened will also be available. And you can always talk to me at my website, through my email, on Facebook. I'm all over the place. So now that you know that, let me tell you about what I did. I'll also tell you just a sort of standing on one foot what I've been doing. I grew up as a song leader and was in college trying to make money as I put myself through an undergraduate program. I sort of accidentally wound up in an early childhood setting at a JCC. I started bringing my guitar and then sometimes singing songs, and then they asked me to lead the Shabbat celebrations, and then they asked me if I wanted to be the music teacher. And I was like, oh, that's a job? Singing and playing with Jewish children all day long? That's a job? Yes, I'll have that job. So I stayed at that JCC for about a decade. I got a degree in Jewish studies. I got a master's in curriculum instruction, and I just finished my doctorate in Jewish education. So I've been pretty exclusively making a living as a Jewish early childhood music educator and sort of ritual leader, which most people don't get to do as a full-time gig. Most people do it, as one little piece of a very full-time career portfolio. So I went to go figure out what I wanted to research, and I decided I wanted to research Hot Shabbat, meaning that it was going to be services that happen at synagogues with children and their families together. And much to my dismay, it had never been researched at all before. So I'm going to sort of back up for a minute because the context that I was able to sort of provide for myself in preparing for my research, I kept on thinking, how did I never know this in the decade that I've been in this field? So 4 things that are really important to consider, and it might not seem like it matters in, which Bim Bam version you're going to choose or how you set up your space when all your parents come for Mother's Day and the chaos ensues because the parents don't listen. But I think it matters a little bit. So the idea that these services for little kids and their families were going to happen in synagogues started cropping up about in the 1980s, and there was a couple things that happened. So if you back way, way, way up and you look at sort of education in America, that there used to be Jewish community as a whole provided the education for little kids. There wasn't a school, and if there was a tutor, it was to train a very specific set of skills. So in the United States, we had a whole new field, a whole new Jewish educational direction, because the community started being responsible for kids knowing things about Jewish life. And now we see, an extension of that, I think, generation to generation, and depending on the community, and it's changed. But a lot of times the kids wind up knowing things that the parents don't, and that's not something that was true for most of Jewish history. The second little symbol is the synagogues, that synagogues are diverse. We didn't have to follow, any specific country's rules, so synagogues got really different from one another, and so there's a lot more diversity amongst communities, and we're also not nearly as cohesive. Another big reason is because now Jews can, we can go to the YMCA, we can go to any other part of American society. We don't have to just stay with one another. But that means that we get a lot of influences from a lot of places. Not commenting on good or bad, just sort of stating that fact. The third little picture is that the fact that early childhood education is a relatively new field. It wasn't until World War II happened that institutionalized care outside of the home really became commonplace. And lastly, music, both because the way that music is recorded, the way that music is shared has changed enormously in the past 40 or 50 years, but also Jewish music, because in the 1970s with Shlomo Karbach and all of this diversity of Judaism, music started being used as a marketing tool. Music started being written for children or for women or for a specific holiday. And all of this is just, it's really new, and all of this matters. If any one of these things is really interesting to you, let's talk about it another time. But with that sort of in mind, I set out to research these particular kinds of services, just so that you understand and can figure out what parts of the information that I present are most relevant to you. These are the types of services that I looked at in my research. I wanted to look at synagogue services for children under 6 to attend with families. So that means it's not specifically the school-wide celebrations that the grown-ups aren't necessarily a part of, which my understanding is a lot of you probably are in the process of facilitating, but I promise the information is still highly, highly relevant. And I looked at places that had been holding these services over a period of time and had a decent number of children attending, just so that the people who were answering the questions that I asked had some context to provide them. Part of a major academic paper is to do a review of literature, and like I mentioned, there wasn't research on Shabbat. It didn't exist before this project. And so at first I thought that was going to be something that was a hurdle of mine, and I have to tell you that it was actually an incredibly helpful thing, that I looked for research and found a lot of very relevant things from a lot of places. So looking at the neuroscientists and the sorts of ways that we've been able to track brains and cognitive development and identify these very critical windows, and to look at social scientists and see that there have been some really amazing and interesting books and longitudinal studies that weren't done in the Jewish setting, again, that are sort of really applicable. And also looking at sort of Jewish text and tradition. There's actually a lot of quotes and pieces of our tradition that talk not in our language, but about developmentally appropriate practice and recognizing the uniqueness of every life stage. And psychologists I'll circle back to, because relationships between family members, relationships between the people who attend our Shabbat celebrations and the members, the leaderships of the community, and that's the most important thing that we can offer. And I wound up finding a lot of the people who are leading it sharing that it was like a social work background that was helping them with their success. So, like I mentioned, these are the two things that came out of really all of those fields, that Shabbat celebrations that involved kids and their families were very unique and had this incredible opportunity for these two windows. The critical window of development, I think everybody sort of knows now, or at least I think you are the choir that understands that early childhood is the time where the brains grow bigger and faster and are just soak up information. But another really interesting piece to look at that again, many fields were able to prove is that when adults become parents, particularly probably Jewish adults who are typically a little bit older, a little bit more educated, and often in a more advanced professional field than the typical non-Jewish American parent. Again, not a rule, just they're newly insecure. People are used to feeling capable and feeling confident. And when people become parents, that shift in identity is also a really critical window for development. So it's not just the kids who are in this sort of rapid acquisition place, it's also the families. I'm going to just toggle over real quick to make sure that nobody's blowing up the chat window. Everybody's doing okay. Oh, no. Checking in the chat window. Is everybody okay? Oh, we lost audio. Is it back?
Yeah, we have audio.
Okay, great. So in looking at this big research project, I had to figure out what is Shabbat, what happens there, and does going to Shabbat, these services that include families and children in synagogues, do anything actually for those parents? Does it encourage engagement in other ways? I researched all of this, and I'm going to go through this stuff really quickly. I'm sorry if there's too much text on the screen. I like to make sure that I offer as many opportunities to engage, but that sometimes means that I'm not able to hit everything as possible. So again, you could see all this later. But these are the things I was looking at. I did surveys and interviews of 2 different data populations. I talked to the grown-ups who go to Tat Shabbat, and I talked to the people who lead Tat Shabbat. Overall, I had about 300 people who provided information from me. Just to give you a brief overview, the adults were really typically very professional people. One of the things that sort of surprised me is that since these were for such a short window, most people were going, 23% of them had gone to these types of programs for over 5 years, so a lot of that was multiple children. Most people were synagogue members, even though I specifically stated that you didn't have to be a member, and one of the criteria for your Tat Shabbat program being part of the study was that there was no requirement or cost for membership. And we were really from all over the United States. This might be particularly interesting since I believe that the conservative movement is mainly represented in the population of this webinar, and that the percentage of participants and leaders were fairly similar and also not too far misaligned from what you would typically expect it to be in the United States. And both the parents and the leaders, the vast majority, with the leaders, I sort of would have assumed that most of them had bar mitzvahs because they're Jewish professionals and took some classes in college, but a majority of the parents as well participated, became B'nai Mitzvah and participated in Hillel or something in college, youth group, so people were pretty involved. And this is the demographics on the leaders. Again, this is a little bit more specific because I think that since many of you are directors, you might find this interesting. But one of the sort of the biggest things that came out of looking at the leadership data is that it's really diverse, that there's no one type of person or program or job description at a synagogue where people wind up leading Tat Shabbat types of programs. Really well-educated people. And one of this little chart, I had a question for the leaders that said, what sorts of things did you study that prepared you for your role? And the bottom 2 were both written in 4 times. So that was interesting to me that there were 4 individuals who wrote in both psychology and theater, which was sort of a good reason to think, for me to expand my thinking about what sorts of backgrounds can really help people's ability to lead programs of this nature. People are really busy. Most people do other things at the synagogue, and most people lead them with another person. This is a graphic that shows you, again, the diversity of the people who are leading Tat Shabbat programs. So 10% of them are directors of education or religious school, which I think is a lot of this population. But the highest majority being rabbis, but 24% is clearly not a majority. That 18% that are in the other category were really all over the map. The rabbi's wife, the ex-president, just really the camp director, just all sorts of people that sort of this role, because they were good at it, because it needed to be done, because they had little kids, they wound up in this capacity. I had sort of whittled down a very long presentation to figure out what I wanted to share with you, but I actually thought this was really interesting if I'm talking to the conservative movement, because of the 39 leaders, the vast majority of them, as you can see, were ordained at Hebrew Union College. And that was one of the things that I looked at in my follow-up interviews and talked to people in conservative shuls who said, you know, maybe it's because the people, there's more lay leaders in a conservative shul who have the capabilities to facilitate a service. I talked to people who suggested that it was sort of the folksy, guitar-playing, musical attitude that might happen at Hebrew Union College, which is affiliated with the Reform movement, that led people to believe that they could lead a sing-along sort of program. Neither of those are facts. I didn't do enough research to tell you absolutely, but I thought they are interesting. Also interesting is that most leaders did not feel like their preparation, their ordination, their track of study prepared them to lead these programs for children and young families. Like I said, nobody had looked at this before, so I just sort of had to come up with a general definition. And I think this is true whether it be in an early childhood setting or a classroom setting or a school-wide celebrating. These experiences for little kids have a lot to do with music and prayer and Jewish ritual. And when people come together to do that, it's about celebrating not only the specific content, the blessings, or whatever topic you're talking about, but it's about Jewish life and community. I wanted to know if prayer played a significant role. The answer was yes. Ritual, again, the answer is yes. And music actually being the largest component that nearly everybody agreed was a significant part of this program. I asked in an open-ended question for both participants, all of the people who filled out the surveys, to provide 3 adjectives to tell me about their Tat Shabbat experience, and it was actually sort of astounding that for both populations, totally open-ended. I don't know how much you guys know about statistics, but this is rare. The top 3 for both populations were the same. So Tat Shabbat is number 1, fun, number 2, musical, and number 3, engaging.
I only had one more meta.
Yeah. Is that a question? No. I'm checking this. Checking the chat. Checking the chat. Yes, you'll get a copy. Great. So now, again, and I know that I'm going way too fast for human consumption. Whoa. So the answer of, what is Tat Shabbat doing, 97% of the participants agree that it provides a positive Jewish experience for their family. So that's great news. Almost everybody had a question or a concern or a challenge or a complaint, however you want to do it. But overall, even with people not being 100% satisfied, this is something that they agree upon. Like I mentioned in all the literature, I found out again and again from all these different fields, talking about relationships being the most potent opportunity to grow not only Jewish community, but really to secure Jewish continuity. It's really great that 91% of these participants are agreeing that they think that these programs are providing opportunities to create and nurture those relationships. So it's really good news. I was a little bit concerned that when I got to the end of the data, I wouldn't be able to, go around the country and tell people that they should hire me to lead Tat Shabbats and help them with Tat Shabbats. But the truth is that the vast majority of people thinks that Tat Shabbat does really powerful and important things. So that's why I'm going to talk about it, and that's why I'm going to continue the research about it, and that's why I'm authentically so excited that 90 people signed up for this webinar today. Encouraging families to participate in Jewish life, connecting families to Jewish community. This is the stuff that's really powerful. I gave the participants a list of 26 examples of engagement, and I said, please indicate that my family does not do this, my family does this, but Tat Shabbat has no influence, my family does this, and Tat Shabbat influenced our decision to do this. 96% said that it engaged them in life, and 89% gave a specific example of something that they did as a result of going to Tat Shabbat. Ooh, sorry, that was too fast. This is really way too much slides. So I'm going to take a beat, and I'm going to just stop talking for about 30 seconds so that you can look. These were the most commonly practiced examples of engagement. The purple is how many of the participants did that example of engagement, and the green is how many people credit Tat Shabbat with for influencing their decision to do that example of engagement. So as you can see, social interactions being the number one is a wonderful thing. As a musician, I was pleasantly surprised that listening to or singing Jewish music was the most commonly credited example of engagement that people gave to Tat Shabbat. This is the only other slide that has this much text. I promise I'm not going to give you too much anymore. But when we circle back to all the implications, I'm going to be talking about some of the sort of best principles that you as professionals definitely know are necessary. Having adequate expertise to plan and execute a Shabbat program, clearly articulated purpose and goal, assessing challenges and successes, ideally, I'm pretty sure we could all agree that each of these things should be happening at every place that's trying to run a successful Tot Shabbat. So it's happening most places for most of these things, so that's good. But I would sort of draw the attention to anyone who is wondering why their program isn't as successful as they want it to be, and ask them to consider if they're doing these 7 things, because if they're not, then that's a very easy answer for how can I address some of the challenges. It's these things. I think I'm going to breeze through this part because I've already went over my 15 minutes where I wanted to tell you about the research that I found. My whole dissertation is on my website, and all of these slides will be available to you. But it was interesting to me that I think it was 98% of the people said that they included Shema, and I think the next most likely included prayer was Baruch Hu, and that was at like 50-something%. So by a very significant margin, Shema was being the most utilized prayer. And I also thought that second point, that the diversity of musical strategies that were being used was very impressive. I was pleasantly surprised to learn that in most programs, English, Hebrew, echo, movement, zipper songs, all of these things, most leaders seem to be familiar with, and I think that's a wonderful thing. This is just interesting, and it's sort of been the piece of information that most people have asked. I have appendices at the end of my 200-page dissertation, and this is one of the ones that people always tell me. So 63 times people told me that it did Bim Bam, and I don't think that any of these things are going to be particularly surprising to anyone, but these are things that people are super interested in. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to check in with the chats real quick. A zipper song is like a song where you sing a little piece and then it can change. So probably the one with which you're most familiar would be Old MacDonald, because you can put any animal in it and then you can put any song in it. But a zipper song that I very often do the Doug Cutler Thank You God song. So thank you for my mommy, thank you for my dad, they love me when I'm happy, they love me when I'm sad, and then you can go around the room and let people fill in the line. Thank you for my. So there's a lot of different songs that sort of lend themselves to that in a Jewish setting. And that's a whole nother conversation we can have. Was that the only question that we were at? Great. So I'm gonna talk for about 5 more minutes. Wait, I just got an echo that I didn't have before. Did you guys also just start having that? All right, I'm going to plug in my headset. I don't know what happened that caused that, but I would like it to stop. Is that better? Any feedback? I'm still hearing an echo. So I'm going to ask that everybody turn mute on. Because that means somebody else's computer is doing that. How's that? Better? Did that fix it? Great. Okay. So I'm going to talk for about 5 more minutes about some of the implications, and then I'm going to check back in with the chat window. So as I'm talking, I invite you to consider how you want me to focus the second half of what I'm talking about. So one of the greatest things that after I collected all the interviews, collected all the surveys, I did 21 follow-up interviews. And in 2 interviews, I heard almost the same thing from 2 different moms. They both had toddlers, and they both had a baby, and they told me that because they went to these synagogue celebrations where they got to see how other people lit candles, how other people explained Shabbat to little kids, it really deeply impacted the way that they celebrate Shabbat at home. And they were both very grateful for it. And they both said that watching their child do something while someone else facilitated helped them learn about their child and helped them learn about their child's abilities. And it was just such an amazing conversation. And the really interesting piece of this whole thing to me was that one of the moms is Jew by choice, who is married to her husband grew up in a very rural part of the South where he grew up with a Christmas tree, and they sort of said her word, not mine, Christianized approach to bedtime and saying prayers. And the other mom is a rabbi who was married to a rabbi. So her husband leads the service, and they both were able to say, wow, going to this place where somebody else helped my child do this really changed it in our home. And when we don't have the occasion to celebrate Shabbat at school or in the synagogue, my kid is saying, well, what are we doing? How do we mark it? And I think that's something that, I don't know if that's something that all of you know that you're providing for your families. I don't even know if you know that your families want it. To be honest, I'm not sure all the families know that that's something that they're looking for. But again and again, I talk to people who said, once I realized what my community was able to offer my kid, it changed the way I felt about my community. I had another parent who told me this story about how it was a preschool director, and she said she got an email from a mom telling the story about how after Shabbat, Tat Shabbat ended, the kids and families went off to go have oneg in a separate room, and the rabbi and the cantor, the song leader, somebody, went into the main sanctuary to lead the main service. And this 2-year-old wanted to go back into the sanctuary, and the service hadn't started yet, so the parents said, fine, that's okay. And he sort of toddled up to the bima and was talking to the rabbi, and when it was time for the service to start, the parents said, all right, kiddo, let's go. It's time to leave because they need to go. And the rabbi and the cantor said, it's fine, he can stay. And then the kid requested his favorite song, this little toddler's favorite song, and the rabbi and the cantor actually changed their plan and used it as the opening song for the congregational service. And then after that song was over, they said, bye-bye, go, have a Shabbat Shalom. The kid and the parents left. And so the mom sent an email and said, I grew up with Shabbat, with being Jewish, about eating food and about, it wasn't what I just saw. And now the mom saying, I love Judaism, and I understand that this community has so much to offer us, and that's literally the highlight of my toddler's life, and it happened at synagogue. And again, I don't think that's something that parents are necessarily signing up at the Jewish Early Childhood Center to say, that's what I'm looking for. But when you can facilitate it by using some of the principles I'll share with you in a moment, it can be an incredibly, incredibly powerful experience. Lots of people said, well, my husband didn't want to be Jewish because he went to yeshiva and it was shoved down his throat. And then when my husband saw my girls dancing and singing and loving being Jewish, it changed the way my husband felt about Judaism. Again and again, adults are seeing Judaism for something different and something relevant and something meaningful and something attractive, which is sort of a momentum that we can't lose. So when I have 2 kids, and I was sort of taken aback when the pediatrician at one of the newborn visits gave me a survey, and it was to test for postpartum depression. And I learned that in 2010, the Academy of Pediatricians, I forget the acronym, suggested that all pediatricians assess moms for their postpartum depression. And I think that there's such a parallel there, because the pediatrician isn't going to treat the mom's PPD if that's happening, but the mom's wellness is you can't extract the mom's wellness from the baby's wellness. And I think the rabbis or the school directors, whomever it is who's leading these sorts of programs that invite families into the congregation, are sort of like the pediatrician, where again and again, people tell me, I go to Tat Shabbat, or, where my kid goes to preschool, and then, my uncle got sick and we needed somebody to visit us in the hospital. And I'm sure any rabbis or clergy people who are on the list can talk about, when we needed a rabbi for a baby naming, or when we needed somebody to officiate at whatever life cycle event. These are these really unique opportunities, and I think we just need to recognize that these programs are not just for these little kids, and that the parents are learning and the parents are watching, and you can, try to run marketing, Facebook ads, open houses. There's a million ways that communities are trying to attract members, and I think that this is one of them that we might not be paying enough attention to. Like I said, critical window. Both the parents and the kids are doing something drastic in their identity. And there's some really interesting research that looked at a very, very small time window, that when babies are born, people are just, everything's too chaotic and they can't even get out the door. But when a kid starts to be between like 4 and 6 months old, the parents start looking for a play group or for a class, and they're looking to find experts, quote unquote, who can help them on their parenting journey. And at those classes, those things, they start to build a social group, which is a wonderful thing. But by the kid's second birthday or so, the parents stop looking to that institution or expert for help and start looking to their peer group. So we have a very critical window when kids are really, really little, and we need to be providing opportunities to establish ourselves as experts, establish ourselves as resources, really before that kid is 2, ideally. Of course, if they don't show up at your door till they're older, you can't. But really recognizing that you showing people that you are relevant and that you care about them is exactly what you need to do at Shabbat celebrations. So I already told you a lot of this stuff. I'm gonna bop back into the chat screen like I told you that I would, to see if there's something that I'm missing. Nope, nobody's having anything. Cool. So then I'll just keep going. I'll check back in. But what I want people to do is sort of recognize all that these experiences can be, and you've already got this. People know how to do this, and I don't think that everybody's applying the same set of skills and knowledge that they would apply in other settings. I'm not a rabbi, but when I talk to rabbis, I very rarely find rabbis who say, I just sort of walk into synagogue on Friday night and wing it. They've planned their sermon. There's a menu of the music. And I don't think people are doing the same sort of intentional design when they're looking at, the Friday morning Shabbat sing-along. So really elevating our understanding of how important this is and recognizing that this is an educational experience for everyone. So that means for the early childhood teachers, that means for the grandparents, for the siblings, everyone in there. If we can present information that's interesting to them, will increase their engagement and increase their ability to do what we're inviting them to do. And the other piece that I won't talk about because I'll go off on a tangent and it's just amazing. But there's a lot of research that talks about how good religion is for little kids, the most significant thing that impacts children's abilities is their participation in a network. It's the community piece. It's the relationship piece. So kids have better outcomes with their standardized testing and with their likelihood to have, all sorts of risky behaviors in teenager years. There was also some really fascinating research about how routines and rituals are an incredibly important piece of children's development, and that in a family who practices a routine, like lighting candles, for instance, and not only does it every week, but recognizes that a child's ability to participate is going to change over time, has cognitive, motor skills, relationship skills, emotional, like everything that our parents come wanting to do. Lots of people are looking for an academic school that will prepare them for kindergarten or take a test or get them into the Ivy Leagues. I don't know. I don't mean to sound so flip about it, but sometimes it seems silly to me, which I probably shouldn't share. But we can do all of those things, and looking at a kid and saying, well, at 6 months, we can hold you and you can look at the candles and we can recognize that your eyes are tracking the hands of the ritual objects. And then at 12 months, you're grasping this and you're able to, do a motion for bim bam. And then at 18 months, you can say amen, and you can also identify whatever it is. But kids are growing, and one of the ways we can track their growth is by looking at how they engage in whatever rituals we're facilitating, but that means that we have to invite people to engage in them in a lot of ways. Like I already shared with you, there's an amazing book, if this is a particularly interesting part of you, I think it's called Keeping the Faith, and this longitudinal study about 350 people over 4 generations and how religion and faith was passed from one generation to the next. And it was found that, amazingly, throughout the past, I think it was 100 years or so. Religion and parents and the church, whatever your doctrine is, actually hasn't become any less influential. Everybody sort of bemoans like Twitter is just being the thing that tells all our teens what to do. And it's really, the research didn't back that up. And that evangelicals, Mormons, and religious Jews are the three groups that are most successful in keeping the faith and encouraging people to stay from, Lador Vador. And there's a lot of factors, and I'll talk about that for too long. That can be a whole nother webinar if we want to do it. But read that book. It's really great. So you guys, from looking at sort of the Excel spreadsheet, are mainly educators. You're professionals. You know what you're doing. And wait, I don't want to do that yet. And so I'm going to suggest that if you don't already do the same sort of feedback loop that you might do with a lesson plan or expect for your teachers to do when they're mapping a curriculum or doing whatever, find a framework and then utilize it. I like UBD. Again, that could be a whole nother webinar, but this egg is part of the planning framework that is taught by Wiggins and McTighe, which talks about before you decide the learning experience, what you're actually going to do, the first thing you have to do is you want to figure out these three things. What are the big ideas? What's important to know and do? And what's worthy of familiarity? But the second question, before you even decide what activities are going to help you do these things, is how are you going to know? I also really like this model because for me, the big ideas, this sort of maps out what the littlest kids and the bigger kids can do. So, my big idea, whenever I'm presenting a program in a synagogue or a Jewish community, my big idea, my enduring understanding is come back. This is good. You matter. Please come back, because no matter what the content I want to teach, that's got to be the biggest thing. So even no matter your age, what that is. But important to know and do can be, sort of scaffolded for the various ages. So I might think for my 4-year-olds, the big ideas are the things that are sort of worthy of familiarity for my 2-year-olds. And the other piece, these are the 10 guidelines to developmentally appropriate practice. I sort of edited them, but I didn't make these. These are NACI guidelines, and these are things that everybody knows a little bit about, who's a professional, who's being successful at this point, acknowledging what participants do and say and encouraging and modeling. This is just a really respectful approach to education, and I have been in too many situations where the leadership isn't doing some of these things that I think when we think about early childhood education, we understand is pretty basic, but I haven't seen in practice. And looking, I'll tell you that the NACI does a sort of an incredible job of whittling down a few things that if there's a person on your team, partner, who doesn't have an early childhood background or doesn't resonate with these sort of suggestions, using some of their information and figuring out how you can apply what if you're an early childhood educator, figure out what you know that can make these presentations better and more meaningful. And if you're a rabbi, figure out, which Pirkei Avot can help elevate the understanding. No matter what your background is, there's some little piece that can make everybody's experience better. And I think that's about the end of what I wanted to make sure. I would encourage anyone who is planning these sorts of principles, again, to figure out what the goals are and how to assess it, but also look at all of the examples, all the places and things that you do in your life that are successfully engaging more than one population, and then figure out how you might be able to apply it to your Shabbat celebration, be it in your classroom or synagogue, whatever. Think about Disney World and how they have, in the waiting area, they have like little fun facts that are written down low so that little kids who are waiting in line can see them. And they're also going to have music playing that sets the mood or tells you something about this experience you're going on. And they probably have, signs that are written in multiple languages and also Braille or whatever. If you look around, I don't know whose idea it was to give kids crayons at restaurants and provide a menu for them, but it's the same idea. People being thoughtful about how we can encourage different people at different levels of development with a whole bunch of different preferences, how everybody can be happy and connected in the same space, and whatever we can provide to help them do that, that's what we want to do. So that's why, the songs that let little kids clap their hands or say bim bam is really important, but it's really moving beyond that. I took a music together training, and I think they're really, really very, very brilliant. And I'm going to come back so I can see all your gorgeous faces. One of the things that they teach is that you should, for every 15 minutes of mentally appropriate learning that you do with little kids, you should have 45 seconds of developmentally appropriate learning for their grown-ups. So if I'm, singing a song and I am, I just did a song where Moses went up the mountain and down the mountain and he threw the tablets, and we did it with scarves. But, as I'm collecting the scarves, I'll say something to the grown-ups about Mount Sinai, or about why scarves and the texture that it's offering them is important to their motor skills. Or I'll say, like, hey, grown-ups, have you guys seen that awesome YouTube video? Whatever it is, that while kids are collecting the scarves, I'm going to give some invitation to engage with information that's more meaningful to the grown-ups than for the kids. And as I map out, I have 45 minutes with these kids, I want to make sure that I do that at least 3 times. And the other little piece of this that I'm going to the chat window again, and I'll look up the author of Keeping the Faith in a moment, A. Drum. The other little piece of this is that think about, like, everybody wants to connect, everybody wants to have relationships, everyone just wants to feel known and loved and important. So as much as you can help people notice what people are doing and recognize what they are, what they're capable of, I think that's a really important piece to really having all the success. I'm going to turn off my screen so I can see everybody's faces, because now we're in our last quarter of our time together, and I've just talked to you for a really long time. I see some of you looking a little glazed, no judgment. But I want to make sure that I check in and see if there's a piece that I can offer, or maybe something that I shared that you guys feel like you want to add on to. Also, I'm going to take a sip of water, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of all of your people. Anyone? Hi. Yes, I'm just going to post a link real quick to answer the other question, and then I'm happy. So yes, the answer is, wow, there's a lot of books called Keeping the Faith. So many books called Keeping the Faith. So all of this is absolutely applicable, whether it be for the kids or for the grown-ups and for anyone. I think sort of the big idea is that highlighting what's meaningful and everybody wants to feel capable, even the ittiest bittiest of babies. So when I'm teaching, and like much to the dismay of so many people who've like flown me in to be my specialist, like Muse Emily's, I'll almost always start a musical program that I'm doing with the ABCs. Because before I go and push the kids past what they already know and challenge them to learn something new, I want them to feel confident and capable, and I want to give them the opportunity to show me what they know. And I think sometimes when it comes to the Jewish piece, with kids or not with kids, we sometimes give a little bit too much information a little bit too quickly. I love to share with kids that if they don't know how to pronounce all of the words in a bracha, they can just say amen. And I'll have, my baby could learn, my second kid, I think amen was like maybe her 6th or 7th word. It went mama, dada, hi, bye, challah, amen. And she's just like figuring out what little piece we can give to those little tiny Jews to show them how capable and how confident they are. And I also think, babies, little itty tiny babies, they know you're going to ooh and ah. When you smile at them and they smile back at you, they get that positive feedback. So I want everybody who's working with really little kids to really consider what sort of positive feedback they're providing, and make sure that they are encouraging the right kinds of behavior. And I think a lot of times, don't spill the juice or stop talking when the rabbi's talking, or there's really accidental ways that people, it breaks my heart, but I've had it happen many times. I'm leading a program and, well, if you can't stay quiet or if you can't stay still, you need to leave. And I think we have to be really careful about that when it comes to the Jewish community piece, whether that be a community of 4 infants or 400, mixed ages. That people, think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and like people who are safe and comfortable and well-fed, and I don't know if it's more true for toddlers than for grown-ups. I think it's just more obvious for toddlers than for grown-ups. Sort of making sure that all of the basic thing that kids come into celebrating Shabbat as rested as possible. For grown-ups, we go into Shabbat thinking, well, this is a day of rest. I need to take a deep breath. I need to take a shower. I know I'm going to enjoy a delicious meal. And kids don't yet have the years of experience to be able to anticipate some of the things that are coming for Shabbat. So I think to help little ones prepare for this experience, we might need to provide some of that extra love and nurture so that they can reach us in this really comfortable place. Because it's that nudgy, lovey sort of thing, kids. I make parents cry a lot, but it's because we sort of have to acknowledge that there is this sacred, holy nature of this meeting that might not be innate for a toddler, and that really easily gets pushed to the side when we turn. I hope I'm not sending too mixed of messages, because I just said, put on your teacher hat and use DAP and the lesson plan. But when we don't elevate that radical amazement piece of what we're doing. So in a classroom, it's still all about relationships. When they're 10 months old, it's all about relationships. When it's 100 kids and 15 teachers, it's still all about relationships. And just because you're leading them and they're there working for you doesn't make their role any less sacred. So I think just sort of elevating, I think sometimes I am definitely, I'll plan for something differently when I know it's going to be a room full of grown-ups than it's going to be a room full of kids. Because quite honestly, the grown-ups are always the hard ones, right? Kids are generally great listeners, and they don't always do what we say. But I mean, who doesn't do what we say? It's their moms with their phones and the talking and all the schmoozing and stuff. That's great because they're having relationships. But really, just elevating all of what we're doing and putting on all of the hats that we wear. Because I'm so confident that amongst this group of people, there are brilliant and expert abilities in a whole lot of different topics. Sorry, I got all waxing poetic there, but all right. So, author of Keeping the Faith, it is How Religion is Passed On. I'm going to do that one first because that's an easy answer. Families and Faith, How Religion is Passed On. That's what it's called. And it's loading, and I can tell you the author. I'm actually going to do you one better, and I'm just going to post the link in our chat window. Make sure it's the right one. Yes, here it is. So here's the book to everyone. My opinion on Shabbat Friday night versus Saturday morning. Every community is different. That was one of the questions that I asked. So I think it was about 18% of the congregants alternated between Friday nights and Saturday mornings, and then it was a slightly higher percentage of people on Friday evenings versus Saturday mornings. I personally, as a mom with 2 little kids, I much prefer Saturday morning, but that's not what my research did. That's because on Friday I'm done working, blah blah blah, just like the logistics of it. But what I will tell you is that the best way to make an informed decision is to ask your population. And when you ask your population, they become much more involved. And when you invite people to be co-creators, not, hey, would you come to this meeting and would you please be on the board and blah, blah, no. That's really hard to do. But make it a Facebook poll, make a pretty little picture, which one do you supply, which one do you do, which one do you like, and sort of collecting information on any of those sorts of points that you might have. I think are really important. The marketing and the communications piece is a whole nother conversation, but I'm a really big fan of using easy tools to gather the feedback of your community, because So like in one of the schools that I'm at a lot, the biggest question is which room is it in? And when we're in the sanctuary, it's just begging those kids to run in circles around the bima. And in that sanctuary, they're not allowed on the bima. So we moved the time so that we could be in a place where there was an empty classroom where the kids can run in circles. Because if we're barking rules at them the entire time, no matter how awesome the music and the intentionality and the pedagogy, doesn't matter, they're running in circles. So you have to make a decision based on your space, your community, and their preferences. I do Havdalah for Sunday school tots. I love Havdalah. It's my personal favorite. I do, well, so many things. I didn't scroll up. So I've done Havdalah on Sundays. I do a Havdalah at a school every Monday. It's a very sensory holiday. So my favorite, I'll tell you my two favorite things about Havdalah is one, we take hamster balls, and then we put tea bags in them. We call them besamim balls. And then you have like dozens of them, and then they can just roll all over the place because everybody uses these like porcelain or glass things that kids aren't allowed to touch. And also then you can swap out the tea bags all the time, so that's a really fun way to do Havdalah. And the other trick is that have you ever put alcohol together with fire? It goes boom. So obviously practice this before you show it to kids, but if you take a little extract, vanilla extract, orange extract, whatever you have handy, and instead of putting it out in the wine, you put the candle out in the extract, there's this like whoosh, and it's like still very contained. I like to do it in like a boiling pan, but then it makes a really strong aroma. That's not your question. It's just two things that I really love to do. Because the sensory aspect of what's going on with Havdalah are really great, and then also showing kids and their grown-ups how this is interesting and relevant and exciting is really cool. You can let, different people can bring in the tea bags, and then you can have like guessing games about which types of things. For Tu B'Shvat, we tried to match the scent to the picture. This is an orange and this kind of whatever. All right, I shared the title. I put a link to Keeping the Faith in, Bridging the Gap with the Group of the Next. Joel, that's a great question, and I can't address it in 4 minutes. So I don't have the answer. It is one of the questions that came up again and again in my research. So send me an email. We can talk. I don't know if we can solve it. Maybe Eileen can help pass on who might be the person who's helping elementary school age in these congregations. I don't know. Fun examples you found people to use. I can't do it in 4 minutes, but I do have lots of them. So you can go to my website or you can email me, Emily at Miss Emily Celebrates. I'm sure Eileen also has a whole host of resources. I try to post, I use a lot of YouTube videos, and there's a lot of people who are doing really fun things. So yes, I don't mean to be self-promotional, but I send out like a newsletter a couple times a month. It's like, here's this super fun Shalom Sesame thing, and also these people at Feller are awesome, and here, use this song. So if you want to know all that stuff, tell me, and then I'll send to that. See an outline of a Tat Shabbat. I hope everyone has the Tat Shabbat handbook. It's one resource that exists, and it's got several different outlines of Tat Shabbats. And again, you can email me and we can talk more specifically about an outline, or you can pull up my dissertation and there's a whole appendix of all the choices that people are making, going through the scrolls. Please don't be offended if I'm not hitting your question, but marketing to the outside community. Yes, talk to your PJ professional. Look at what all of, like, if there's a My Gem or if there's a Monkey Joe's, if there's some sort of little kid franchisey thing that's being successful in your community, watch them. They're doing really good work because they have a lot more money and they have like a big national conglomerate who's giving them. So figure out what is reaching the population that you want to reach in the general community. Show up at a class, sign up for a newsletter, whatever it is. I think that's the easiest sort of standing on one foot answer. And also follow places who are doing really good things on social media. Follow Sesame Street, follow Kveller, follow Bim Bam. And then when they do something, you're like, oh, that's a good idea, then you should do it too. Moving up one. All right, another Joan. Joel, Joan and Joel. Maybe we'll have a powwow at another time. I think that's it. Yes. So I use hamster balls, and like that you get on Amazon. We posted on Facebook asking for people who had hamster balls they weren't using, figuring that, in a family, like a congregation full of people who had little kids, they were extra. And we got a bunch donated, and also a bunch of people send them. And then, so we actually, first I was doing essential oil soaked cotton balls, which worked, but I actually think tea bags are a little bit easier. So you just open up the hamster ball, like, the plastic hands, and then you put the tea bag inside. I have a really adorable picture of my baby, so you need to have a lot, because they're all going to want them, and you also need to figure out how you're going to sort of either accept the chaos or accommodate to the chaos, because the kids, when you're handing them balls, like, you can't be like, all right, children, don't throw or roll the balls that I'm handing you, because, they're little kids. So, sort of having them in a basket or passing them around. But I have a little video of it, and I can maybe send it to Eileen for when the recording goes out, and we can do the Bisami balls. Also, it was pointed out to me that shouting, all right, children, everybody smell your balls, is something that I needed to stop saying, because all these parents were really upset with me, and it was just like, phew. So I'm just going to go ahead and let you learn from my mistake, and you can phrase that really however you choose, but don't do that. But I'm a big fan of, like, all things tea bags. Once I did a Havdalah where we taped underneath the seats a little baggie that had a glow stick, a piece of grape candy or a little thing of raisins, and a tea bag. So, like, as we did each of the brachot, the kids, it was like Oprah style, like, everybody look under your seats and see what you get. But again, I'm constantly looking at what people who are more successful than I, with a larger population and a different budget, what are they doing? This past week, I have like a little Moses puppet, and I would take the little plush Torahs, and my Moses puppet handed each kid a Torah. Who wants a Torah? You get a Torah. You get a Torah. And the kids were like, woo! And all the parents were thinking about Oprah. But there's really great ideas happening all around us, and just so many of them can be applied to the work we're doing if we pay enough attention. I don't know if that happened. We do a program. All right, and people are saying about the programs that they do, so I'm sure you guys are smart. Maybe there's a way to have, another conversation at another time, or share some of the questions and answers. Hopefully, if this is really, the Tat Shabbat outline. So it's called the Tat Shabbat handbook. And it's maybe 5 or 6 years old. I'm not sure. But it really depends. And again, send me an email and we can talk about your specific situation. But as long as you're deciding that all of the Tat Shabbat plans, if you're using the principles of education that you know to be true, and you're being thoughtful and intentional, and you have a feedback loop, you're going to be more successful than, the fanciest, best rated, the most liked Tat Shabbat outline on Pinterest or whatever. Because it matters what you're trying to achieve, and it matters what your community can support. So we're at 2:00 now. I hope I didn't spit too much information. Clearly, this is truly my passion and my joy. I'm doing the whole conference circuit this summer, so maybe I'll meet some of you and talk to some of you. But because I'm finally not a college student for the first time in my life, I want to come and talk to people and visit communities and help people and sort of share all of these things that I've figured out, because it turns out it's not actually that hard to put a lot of these things in place, but most of the people who are in a position to run these sorts of programs have 112 other things on their plate. So bit by bit, chewable chunks, we can be better. Anything else, Eileen? It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'll hang out on the Zoom for a few minutes, too, in case somebody wants to hang out. Is that okay, Eileen? Okay. Sounds good. All right, everybody, happy celebrating whatever you do.